Okay, we'll stay with the Parliament there, the bear pit in New South Wales Parliament, but get some analysis immediately from Andrew Clennell as we watch this, Andrew, our political editor this afternoon, and Jodie Mackay very fired up about the legal obligations. Why the Premier, she's asked repeatedly, did not honour her legal obligations and report the activities of Daryl Maguire. The Premier adamant that she's upheld the highest of standards throughout.
Unfortunately, it's a little bit of a hollow line in relation to this matter. As is normally, Gladys Berejiklian would go for that. What about corrupt Labor? It's a very effective and good line in New South Wales. We had some amazing scandals in New South Wales in relation to that. So that's a typical line, usually goes off in the House. It's still the bear pit. You can see that interesting behaviour in there, but it's socially distanced. They haven't got it full there. But I think that it was interesting to see that that line just seems a bit hollow now. This is kind of her problem going forward. How can she push integrity? How can she call for ministers to stand down or stand aside when their affairs are before ICAC, which happens from time to time? She's done it with John Sidoti. That's the real problem for the Premier going forward. You wonder if after this she might just hang around for 12 months and then hand the baton on, frankly. But I thought one particularly interesting line there, Kieran, was this, I bet there are times you thought you could trust someone and you found you couldn't. It's an interesting line, isn't it? It's intended, I think, to pull at the heartstrings. It's to say, look, everyone goes out with someone they didn't really know what they were really like. I think the problem with that argument is she knew from the phone calls what he was like to some extent. He's saying, what about this land deal? What about this land deal? I'm pushing all these people. It's not even in my electorate. So you just think common sense comes in and, you know, with a picture being painted by the Berejiklian supporters is of a naive woman. But, you know, this is a smart, shrewd political operator. She was the head of the moderates faction in New South Wales. But the ironic thing about it, again, Kieran, with Gladys Berejiklian is she was viewed as such a straighty 180. If she went to lunch with a journalist or dinner, she would insist on paying. She wouldn't even let you pay with your corporate credit card, which, of course, is what all politicians do, what happens in normal business. So for these allegations to come out that she knew of what this guy was up to and the implication she shouldn't have, she should have reported it, which I think is fair in there, that's why the story was so shocking and surprising yesterday.
Take us back to when Maguire was dumped from the Liberal Party. The Premier was adamant that she moved very swiftly in response in those initial stages. But what, if any, relevance is there to, you know, the behaviour on that occasion, to the subsequent phone calls, the tapping, this scandal?
Well, as a journalist in the gallery at the time, I did wonder why and wrote about why it was taking so long. And one of the reasons is that Gladys Berejiklian, people believe, she denies, knowing he was about to appear on the witness stand, went on leave in Queensland and basically went excommunicado. So there was a week of this, and John Barilaro and his staff were really angry that they were left holding this, you know, terrible scandal and having to defend Daryl Maguire, who's a Lib, like they're the Nats, right? So they couldn't understand. And at the time, people said to me, well, Gladys is just so loyal to her friends. We didn't know that, obviously didn't know, and couldn't have dreamed that she was in a personal relationship with Daryl Maguire at the time. So she eventually, she gets rid of him from the Liberal Party, that's one aspect, but then it's another number of days before he's forced out of Parliament, only after Labor at the time threatened to expel him and to move the motion in Parliament, to put her on the spot to wedge her, to threaten the expulsion motion, which happened to Milton Orkopoulos after a child sex scandal. So then she gets Barry O'Farrell, as I reported at the time, to ring Maguire and say, you've got to leave Parliament. He agrees. And she comes back to Sydney, does a press conference on a Saturday morning saying he's agreed to leave the Parliament. But there were definitely questions around that time at the delay.
Now, she has said, the Premier, on a number of occasions already in this question time, that she's acted in accordance with her obligations. The opposition leader said, in response, you could hear her across the dispatch box, she said, just because you say it doesn't make it's true, doesn't mean it's true. What did you make of that exchange? Because the opposition leader, obviously, I would have expected them to keep asking on that issue, but they've gone to some other matter now. But she's certainly and understandably fired up.
I think it's gone to Dix's now, but I could be wrong. I think that's sort of how usually it's one question each, but since COVID, I'm told that there's a change to stop people spending time in quick proximity, I'm told. So they go out to Dix's. But, yes, I mean, that was an issue that you could very much press. She's vulnerable, really.
When you look at the Health Minister there, Brad Hazzard, been with the Premier day in, day out, also Dominic Perrottet showing his support. They got a special mention today as well, didn't they, from the Prime Minister, Andrew?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, I think it's interesting that in Gladys Berejiklian's appearances, she's electing to have them behind her. She feels, and Andrew Constance has been sent out to support her as well. She wants to show that there is support from her team, that she's in no danger of being rolled, and that's fair enough. And Dominic Perrottet, well, she supported him over the ICAC scandal. I think, you know, you see that situation. So he's returning the support, in effect. I think she sees him as a successor, and there may have even been a secret agreement to that effect. Who knows? But that's helpful for her, I think. That's helpful for the Premier, that there's seen to be unity amid the crisis. Having said that, a couple of ministers privately tell me they can't see how her future is sustainable. They think the biggest risk, Kieran, is really how can she uphold standards? And that's the issue for her. You hear the Premier continually changing or saying that line, I'm about high standards, and then you say, well, are you really? Or if it affects you personally, is it a different situation? The other interesting thing I want to raise about question time and these points she's making with Jodie Mackay sort of yelling out, you convincing yourself, is obviously, you know, normally this setting, unlike the federal parliament, which we show here, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear? Well, today is one of those few days people will hear. And that's when the opposition can get a line of attack up. They've been unable to so far.
Yeah, that's right. Every now and then there is a moment and they've got to seize it at a different level. Of course, Anthony Albanese last week with the budget reply, believe it or not, was last week. It's incredible how quickly this political news cycle moves on. But when you look at Premier Berejiklian, most observers think, you know, as you've said repeatedly, if not in the immediate future, certainly very hard to see her contesting an election, given the scandal, the stench around this. But when you look at Dominic Perrottet, he's the red-hot favourite to be the next Premier. You mentioned that ICAC issue. Can you give our viewers a sense of what that was about? Because I'm sure many of our viewers interstate wouldn't be across that. How serious was that as a headache for the Treasurer?
Yeah, I think it got a bit of a national run with Four Corners and the like. Adele Ferguson did a lot of work on it, the reporter there. But essentially, it's in the weeds a bit, Kieran, compared to this. I mean, this is something that just hits you in the face, doesn't it? It's almost, this story is like something you'd see on the front of a British tabloid, a traditional political sex scandal story. And I guess one of the things working in the Premier's favour is it has focused on the sex rather than the politics or the potential wrongdoing. So that's working to her advantage. I think she's working to that. She's playing up the relationship. Dominic Perrottet, that's in the weeds. He hired a staffer. They were on secondment. There's questions if that was even legal. His chief of staff didn't fill out the paperwork. His chief of staff had to resign, someone who's been with him from the start as a minister. They were very close. And also there was a whistleblower in the organisation who was saying that the people who were running ICAC were doing the wrong thing for injured workers and going on these ridiculous trips, etc., which paints a picture of Perrottet not being in charge. So that's kind of dangerous for him, you know, because you go down to the competence question. But it's just dwarfed by this. And I guess, you know, if you look at a clean skin in the government, it's Rob Stokes. He's a chance. He was mates with Mike Baird. He's been planning minister. Interestingly, on some of that evidence yesterday, Maguire was complaining about Stokes and how he wouldn't approve certain developments. But I think Perrottet is seen as the more competent, notwithstanding the ICAC affair. He's seen as the more articulate. And he's got his own personal challenges, Kieran, because he's got 6 kids. So he's got some family challenges there to address. Morris Yemma had 4. I mean, these things are not easy to juggle that sort of family situation. and it puts immense stress on your family to be Premier, obviously.
Sure.
But,
absolutely.
But yeah, I think he's looking in the running, and I don't know, today, question time, the press conference, the evidence yesterday, putting on a brave face, Gladys Berejiklian, but I've never seen her so weakened. And as you say, it's again how politics can turn around so quickly, because a month ago, we would have been sitting here going, have you ever seen her so strong? Have you ever seen her leadership so strong?
Exactly.
And what they tell you in politics, Kieran, all these pollies who talk to us off the record is you're only one stuff up away, including when they come on Sky, they think about this, by the way, from your career completely ending. And it's just such a true statement in politics, I find.
Yeah, it sure is. And just finally, before we take a break, Andrew, if I'd said to you even a couple of days ago that Premier Berejiklian would be caught up in a scandal of this nature, you would have thought I needed some medication.
Well, the only thing I'll say about that, Kieran, is when I left Canberra last week, I did say to you, I reckon there's another, this year's been so big, there's another couple of big ones coming. And I don't know if we could deal with them, but we have to. So, but you're absolutely right. I would have thought that's ridiculous, Kieran. Apart from anything else, apart from how strongly she's been travelling, no one, given her pattern of behaviour, would have thought for a second that she would be involved with Daryl Maguire, first of all, on a personal level. Secondly, have stayed with him after he was accused by ICAC of corruption and had to resign. And thirdly, have listened to all this talk on the phone about his land deals while he's an MP and not got herself the hell away from it. Even some politicians who haven't extolled the virtues that she has would get the hell away from that conversation. I've had many talks with ministerial chiefs of staff on both sides of politics in Macquarie Street over the years who've told me about improper approaches and have told me they shut it down by saying, if you keep talking, I'm going to talk to ICAC. If Gladys Berejiklian had just done that, she'd be fine today.
Andrew Clennell, thanks.